Now, the IPL, we've had reporting today that the Australia and England players have both been cleared by their boards to play in the second half of the postponed IPL. This includes the players who haven't gone on other tours for their national teams, which I'm sure will go down very badly in some quarters. The early reporting suggests that David Warner, Steve Smith and Marcus Stoinis have all committed to going for IPL Mark II. Some of the other players haven't. We haven't heard from them yet. No word on the England players. But pretty curious that this has been given the go-ahead by the boards.
Well, I don't know that it is really. I think it's where we're going. It's where we're heading. You know, your commitment to your IPL franchise, if you're a cricketer and you've got a contract with them, it makes up a huge amount of your salary. And it's a great fun tournament. Everybody who plays in it absolutely loves doing it. So let's not forget that as well. And I'm not quite sure why we should expect them not to want to do it. KP had been agitating Kevin Peterson about this way back when. And, you know, he's been proved right, whether you like it or not. He's been proved right that the boards have had to cave. In some ways, it helps the boards to know that there's a big paymaster somewhere. It takes a bit of the pressure off them, doesn't it? And what they have to pay the players. So, yeah, I think it does. The optics aren't great from the point of view of the die-hard Australia fan and England fan. They think that these players, therefore, care more about the Rajasthan Royals than they do about the three lions on the chest, which you've got to be lachrymose about and kiss and yank away at your shirt with. But the reality of this is that this is professional sport. I'm not surprised. And I mean, I guess what I'm slightly surprised at is that they're so desperate to actually finish this tournament, because then they're going to go into a T20 World Cup at the same venues. Heaven knows how those pitches are going to hold up. I mean, I dread to think how slow and low it could get at Abu Dhabi by the end of that tournament. But, you know, what's there to say, really? It's a juggernaut that is just going to roll and roll and roll.
Well, you know, if Rashid Khan's defending 88 in the final, then it could be quite a spectacle, a close run thing. But maybe that is part of it, is that it's effectively a warm-up for the T20 World Cup. We've had the schedule for that released as well. So that starts on the 23rd, I think, of October, with Australia, South Africa, and then England, West Indies on night 1, and then India, Pakistan play night 2. Very curious how India and Pakistan always end up in the same group, the same pool at every ICC World Cup. It's happened at every single one by pure coincidence, because the teams are drawn out of a hat.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, just as well, because otherwise they'd never play each other in any form of cricket. So I suppose the mercy of this coincidence, I mean, how long it can go on like this, I don't know. We just have to thank our lucky stars that every time those names come out, they come out next to each other.
We've got a great hat.
It gives us the opportunity for the spectacle.
It's a real quality hat.
Do you know what it is? It's a Harry Potter sorting hat, isn't it? And it just spews out the right result every time. A bit trepidatious for England that their first game should be against the mighty West Indies, who are very, very good at T20. But I really like the T20 World Cup, I have to confess. People may think I'm a heretic for saying that. It's short, it's snappy, always produces crazy drama. I guess one of the things that we'll really be keeping an eye on there is Afghanistan. I mean, without wishing to get too serious and bring the tone of the conversation into darker areas, but how Afghanistan are going to be able to continue with their cricket generally, given what's been happening in their country, that will be something that we'll have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, well, the Taliban have not been famously cricket enthusiasts, and you know there have been numerous bombings at cricket grounds, cricket matches and so on. A lot of people killed in instances like that in Afghanistan over the last few years. I suppose it's one of those things where maybe sometimes the success of a sporting team can help win support where there might not have been support before. It might start to be viewed as a vehicle for national pride by the extremists as well, but you don't necessarily want the team to be representing them or being their vehicles, you know, as some sort of soft power diplomacy kind of vehicle. So, yeah, it's going to be extremely fraught. They've basically been a team in exile anyway over their entire existence. You know, they've never played an international in Afghanistan, and at this rate probably never will. But yeah, how much connection and how much support they can have at home, given that it's being overrun, is the real question.
Yeah, and a quick word on that for Rashid Khan, who's over here at the moment playing in the 100. And he was talking, after bowling his side to victory, and he wasn't really able to celebrate any of his wickets. His mind was on something else. His family's still in Afghanistan. He wasn't able to get them out. He's got to be very careful how he chooses his words, but you could see the genuine nervousness, anxiety that he's got. I mean, it must be really, really tough for those players, not knowing how their families are getting on, not really being able to be in proper contact with them. And we talk about the stresses and strains of cricketers under COVID. They're very real. They're very real, and they're very problematic. And constant lockdowns have caused mental health concerns. But you add on top of that your country's going through that kind of turmoil, it must be unspeakably difficult. So my thoughts go out to all those players.
Yeah, absolutely. So that tournament that Afghanistan will be playing in, the group stages go for 17 days. Once you put the finals in, it'll be just over 3 weeks for the team that makes the finals. They've got reserve days for each of the 3 finals, the 2 semis and the final, which is good to see after what happened in the last T20 World Cup with the women in March 2020. The semi-final washed out for England there. And you mentioned the 100, which I have had very little time to watch much of, but you have been watching. Can you give me a little tour of what's been going on in the 100 ball stuff?
Yeah, well, some of the broadcasters have been accused by George DeBell of employing Kim Jong-un style journalism in trumpeting the wonders of the 100. He has a little bit of a point. But essentially, it's a T20 tournament. It's a franchise T20 tournament, just played with 100 balls. Some bits of it are quite fun, actually. The 10-ball business from one end, which was poo-pooed at the start, does mean that occasionally you'll see bowlers bowl 10 balls straight. It means that you get different tactics, because sometimes you've got a bowler like David Willey, who really is only effective with the new ball. So he can bowl like 15 balls in the power play of 25, and he can bowl 10 balls straight. Or you see, like we did the other day, Adil Rashid bowls the second set of 5, because no one dare call it an over, from one end, and then it flips around to the other end, and he can bowl the next 5, and you think, wow, that's really curious. We're struggling with nomenclature, because the idea was to make things simple, and you can poo-poo this, and I generally do,
right.
So they don't like words like over. But then, so what do you call it? So I've got an idea for it. Basically, there's a set of 5 balls. So that's a fiver, right?
Yep.
Now, what's a fiver? A fiver is a £5 note in England. So who's on a £5 note? A Winston. Winston Churchill.
Yep.
You can bowl 10 balls. You bowl 10 balls in one set from one end. Who's on the £10 note? Jane Austen. So lovely gender neutrality. You've got a Winston and you've got an Austen. And if you bowl a maiden, if you get 5 dot balls in your Winston, you've basically bowled a Godiva, a Lady Godiva, which is Cockney rhyming slang for a fiver. Why? Because Lady Godiva famously rode through Coventry naked. So there are no runs in the over. It's a naked over. It's a Godiva. So you've bowled two Winstons, 2 Godivas, none for none, for example, is what it becomes.
Right.
I'm trying to get this off the ground. Not sure it's really working.
Okay. And
essentially,
where does Jane Austen come into that?
Well, Jane Austen is, if you're going to, you bowl an Austen from one end. You bowl a Jane Austen from one end, because that's 10 balls. You might bowl 2 Winstons in an Austen. You might bowl 2 Winstons. One of them's a Godiva in your Austen.
Well, I
think that.
I suppose
it would work.
Winston Churchill does go together strongly with Pride and Prejudice as well. So, I think it all ties in.
That is a very strong point. As for the cricket on the field, I've got to be honest with you. In the men's tournament, it's a decent standard. It's probably not much different from the T20 Blast for obvious COVID reasons, actually. No Aussie players are over. No West Indian players, because it's sort of clashing. Well, there are some, but very few. It's clashing with the CPL. So it's kind of the better T20 players accumulated into 8 sides. The crowds have been fantastic. The main benefit has been to women's cricket. I've never seen such a high quality of women's domestic cricket, and I include in that the Women's Big Bash. And next year, hopefully, Aussie players will come over as well, which will make it just a stellar tournament. Some great stats for you. 25,000 people watched 2 women's games in a weekend or over the course of 3 days. One was at the Oval, one was at Lord's. So the women's game happens first. They're all double headers. Women's game, say, at 3 o'clock, and the men's game at sort of 6:30. There were 12,000 or so in for the women's section, and then they add up the men. Some people come in for the men's games. That 25,000 was 2,000 fewer than watched the entirety of the women's KSL, which was the T20 tournament before, or sort of equivalent to the women's Big Bash that happened before the 100. So the crowds are flocking in. The recognition of women's cricket is going through the roof. I was at a game in Manchester when Sophie Eccleston walked out to bat, and the crowd there were about 8,000 in at that point, genuinely cheered because they knew who she was, which may sound petty, but it's in fact really important because we're starting to see women's cricket really entering into the consciousness of crowds. That's wonderful to see. And I got to commentate on a game where the Northern Superchargers, who are basically Yorkshire, were playing against the Manchester Originals, which is basically Lancashire. The crowd was going absolutely berserk for Superchargers v Originals, even though it wasn't Yorkshire v Lancashire. Superchargers scored 200. They got to 200 with a 4 off their last ball. The crowd went ballistic because there is something kind of lovely about the numbers, the 100, and it's 200. Poor old Stephen Finn, with whom I do a podcast, which I'm going to plug briefly, Zero Ducks Given. He's our regular on that. He got hit for 29 runs in his Winston, in his 5 balls. 29 runs. Or by his Middlesex teammate, John Simpson. So it's 2 Middlesex players playing against each other in what was effectively a Roses derby in the north of England. There was so much to unpick. It was wonderful. And yet, all the misgivings I had about, will people turn up? Will they care about these manufactured entities that never existed? Have not been founded. Actually, they've had great crowds. It's been superb for that. But you've got to balance that with the damage it does to county cricket, the structure of cricket, the schedule of cricket. There's no red ball cricket here, so when England keep losing test matches, they can't go and find a batter who's in form because there's none of it happening. But these are problems that happen around the world. The problem about the basic fundamentals of domestic cricket in England are ones that have come to the fore, whether they'll be able to do some tweaks, maybe get rid of the T20 blast. That has knock-on problems for the counties and finances. But in essence, it's a jolly good romp. There's a game every day. It's got a narrative flow, like all the best tournaments. In England, we haven't been able to do that because we had 18 counties playing against each other. No one, somebody could score 100, but it wasn't being televised, so you had to catch a bit of it on a live stream or a little bit on Twitter, and this has just made the whole thing much more neat. It's not as ludicrous as I thought it was going to be, far from it. And in essence, headline for the women, absolutely fantastic. It's transforming women's cricket.
Yeah, in the end, it's cricket, and we like cricket, so we're probably going to like it to some extent. The question is always whether it needed to be that cricket, or whether the same promotion and backing could have been given to cricket that already existed, which I don't suppose we'll ever be able to answer, because that's where we are. I think we've reached a point where we can leave it. Daniel Norcross, thank you so much for being our fill-in, my temporary Adam on the show today.
Being an ersatz Adam has always been my ambition, and I'm delighted to have achieved it. But thank you very much for having me. It's been a thorough joy. Always a delight talking to you, Jeffrey. And I think we're hooking up again, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. We'll be doing story time this weekend, me and DN. So this has been the final word. Geoff Lemon, Daniel Norcross. The show is out on the Bad Producer Podcast Network. Thanks to Brick Lane, fine makers of fine beer, who have been supporting the show, and also to the Lord's Taverners. And a big thanks to everyone who supports the show on Patreon. We'll be getting to a bunch of those Nerd Pledge numbers on Storytime on the weekend. If you want to check that out, it's patreon.com/The Final Word. Everything else, Lord's Tavs details and so on, will all be in the show notes. And we will be back with you on the weekend for Storytime to dig into cricket history. See you next time.
Bye-bye.